A very warm welcome to both our speaker and speaker's interviewer, if I may call you that, Kamini, Rekha Rodwittiya and Kamini Sawhney this evening to the Museum Society of Bombay. And I welcome you on behalf of the CSMVS, the chairperson, the trustees, the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, on behalf of the Museum Society and its entire committee, and all of us who have joined this evening, friends and members. Welcome, Rekha, and welcome, Kamini. We're looking forward to this interaction. It's going to be very interesting. Rekha is going to be addressing her practice, both within the studio and without, and she'll be joined in this conversation with Kamini Sawhney. I normally introduce the speakers, but today I'm going to start with a little bit of the synopsis of what you're going to hear today. But before that, I would like to thank our member, Dr. Sophia Karanja, who initiated this particular program. Thank you, Sophia. It's been an encouragement from you that we go ahead with this event this evening. It's not a subject that we delve with on a regular basis. So contemporary art, which is close to my heart, of course, is a welcome topic for this evening. So thank you, Sophia, for initiating this. And what are we going to hear today? We're going to hear two old friends and colleagues and what we call co-travelers in the art space to explore the ideas, situations, and contexts that have been stimulated Rekha Rodwittiya through her journey as an artist. Together, they examine not just the artist space, but the many worlds they inhabit as women and as human beings, and how an unprecedented event can change the way we live, think, and engage with one another. And perhaps sometimes it's a situation that changes us forever. Little word about Rekha, who I've known for so many years. Rekha Rodwittiya is an artist, an independent curator, writer, and above all, a teacher, having around 40 years of experience in the field of art. She has had 38 solo exhibitions across the world and has been presented nationally and internationally in over 130 exhibitions and group exhibitions, 16 art fairs across, and numerous residencies and site-specific projects. She has been actively involved in art teaching through alternative, non-institutionalized methods, and I have been the receiving end of some of those, Rekha. A huge learning curve for me, so I appreciate it even more today than earlier. And as well as being a guest faculty at art colleges in India and abroad. She is the founder and CEO of a very interesting group of people, what she calls the Collective Studio in Baroda. She is vocal within the space, of course, of feminist discourse, and we may be hearing some of that today. I look forward to it. And a champion of women's empowerment and equal rights. Welcome, Rekha. I really appreciate. I know how you like to be tucked away in your studio without distraction. So this is indeed a privilege to have you here with us this evening. A few words about somebody who was living in Bombay for many years, Kamini Sawhney. You have met her and interacted with her at JNAF, but now she leads the team at MAP as its first director, Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore. Over the past year, she has brought together a young, inspired team that is focused on creating a new museum experience for audiences in India. As the leader of a founding team, Kamini has helped shape a vision for MAP that seeks to inspire people to interact with art in ways that encourage humanity, encourage empathy, and encourage a deeper understanding of the world we all live in. Bringing institutions together in collaborative projects has been one of her special skills, enabling audiences in India the opportunity to enjoy several exhibitions in collaboration with the Tate London, Foam Museum Amsterdam, the Duke University, Durham, and KNAM in New Delhi, and many, many more. And currently, she has helped in curating the second anniversary of MAP's existence, again done virtually, but this time a collaborative between contemporary art and music of all genres. I have found watching this program, Kamini, extremely fascinating, and I think at times entertaining too. So congratulations to you and everyone at MAP for putting this forward for us to all hear and see. I don't wish to stand between our two delightful young ladies and hand you over now before I make one more thank you, and that's to the technical team, to Jason, who hands holds all of us, ably assisted by Aishwarya, Mrinalini, and Yashraj. They do this on a volunteer basis week after week and have been a strong support to the Museum Society of Mumbai since May 2020. So thank you again, tech team, for your hard work and joining us week after week and sometimes twice a week. So thank you, Rekha. Thank you, Kamini. We're looking forward to this interaction, this conversation. And without much more, I hand you over to the technical team. And ladies and gentlemen, sit back and enjoy this evening. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much, Firoza, for that very lovely introduction. It is a pleasure to be on a platform jointly hosted by the Museum Society and the CSMVS, where I literally cut my museum teeth. So I'm delighted to be in conversation with Rekha Rodwittiya. As Firoza said, we have been fellow travelers in the art ecosystem for some time now. We have worked together professionally, interacted at various fora, and we have grown to be good friends as well. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But before we begin, I must tell you the story of how we first met. I was with the JNAF at the CSMBS, and Rekha's work, The Painted Room, was part of the collection. So this was an installation of 12 works that were created by her for the celebration of 50 years at the UN. So each one of these 12 works was about 10 feet by 3 feet. And I thought, oh, we're never going to be able to show this work in its entirety in the gallery space. It's never going to see the light of day. So what I did was I picked up one of these works, which was my favorite, and I put it in the exhibition, my opening exhibition on women artists in the collection. And little did I know, I had put my head into the lion's mouth. So I met Rekha and she read me the riot act. But there is a happy ending. Several years later, we were actually able to install the painted room in the gallery space. And I'm sure many of you saw it there. We had a great time working on the show and we became good friends. So Rekha, since we are talking today about within the studio and without, I really wanted us to begin with that space, the studio. How important is the physical space itself to your daily practice? Do you need to be rooted in this environment to be able to think and to create? Or is a studio just a space in your head? You can be anywhere and you just need the tools of your trade to paint.
First of all, thank you so much to the museum, to Firoza's very sweet and loving introduction. And Kamini, thank you for taking time out to actually be within this conversation. As everyone knows, we're close friends and believers in common concerns. To address your question, it's an interesting thing. I chose to be a mother at a very young age, and I was currently at the same time in college. And I think that the decision to be a parent at a young age obliged me and insisted of me to have a kind of enforced discipline that perhaps others of my age may have not felt the need for. And I think that brought about my sense of recognizing that wherever I placed myself in a time that was allotted to being focused on the production of art would become the confines of what one could call a studio. And so I think that, it has never been important for me to have what may be the perfect space within to work. So I can remember, coming back from my studies in London and needing a space so desperately and actually working in somebody's outhouse, which was not more than 8 feet by 10 feet. I then was able to actually have, my own studio over a period of time in my home, which was only 6 feet by 18 feet. So, and within that, I actually made a painting that was a triptych that was 18 feet by 6 feet high, you see? So I think it's an interesting thing that what does space mean to somebody? For me, I think that there are many lessons to learn from some of the people that have been great influencers of my life. And I go back to Nelson Mandela again, where you have somebody who was able to think for so many years in a confined space. We are still the privileged people who hold our liberty. And I think that as a creative individual, for me, my studio space is sacred for me. It is not a space of transaction. It is a space where I choose to place my thinking space, my spiritual space. I'm not religious, but my spiritual space. So it is a place where I stand completely, naked for myself, and in extreme critical. In a critical space with myself, because I think that that's a very important thing. So yes, the studio is a place which over the years, I think I've been fortunate to expand and to have a larger space. But at the end of the day, it's actually the paintbrush in my hand with the surface that I'm working on, and that everything else then melts away. And I think that also I would have to say that the choice of having my studio in my home has been a deliberate one. It allows me to wear many hats at one time and to insist again of myself that a certain number of hours become imperative to the life clock that I live by. So.
And is the cat the only one who is allowed into that sacred space?
That's my friends are allowed into my space, but they have to be very, within that intimate space of sharing. But we have opened our doors to many young people, and there have been many instances where I have literally tripped over children working in my space as well on their own works. Maybe because they have having certain emotional issues and need a certain greater embrace, or they actually just don't have a physical space. But what is important for me is that I have to respect for myself that space is sacred for me. I don't think it's important that others need to, I don't insist that of others. But for me, that place where I place my concentration and my focus becomes a sacred space. And I think once you do that, you can actually, everything else disappears, because one isn't often going to be in situations where you can create solitude or isolation in that perfect balance. And I think that as a woman, I was just recently talking to a young artist, a woman artist who has been struggling with having, a child in her life. And I remember she came home and she cried because I yelled at her that she was, she had to get her focus back. And so we met up the other day, and the first thing she did was she took my hand and she said, "See, I'm not crying. And I'm working." And I said, "Yes, that's what you're supposed to do." And but the point of the matter is that it's very difficult for women often to find that space in solitude. And we have to find other ways within this multidimensional space that we exist to pull it out, to find that corner, to find that moment. And so the night has often been a time that I have worked in. There are many family obligations you have. Your parents are ill, you're looking after them. And these, I think, are part of the Asian method of living. We live in a different cultural, contextualized choice. And so the modernity that we choose to incorporate into our lives is not simply an adaptation of some kind of Western construct of what independence is. I think that I wouldn't live my life any other way. I would have always wanted to be a caregiver. And this is part and parcel of the fact that I am an artist. These choices are not outside of that.
I agree. I think women are magicians. There's so many things to juggle, but we'll come back to that later. Since we're talking about location and space, when I think Rekha, I think Baroda. This city has been so much a part of your journey, both as a student of art and as a practitioner. I'm really almost envious of the wonderful set of teachers that you had at MS Varoda. There's KG Subramaniam, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, Nasreen Mohammadi. These were all great artists and brilliant minds. This must have been such a rich, vibrant ecosystem for all of you as young artists and students. Do you want to talk about that time?
Kamini, I think all people from particular generations, their own particular generation, would see themselves as privileged. But having said that, I think that there are certain time frameworks within history that we have to perceive as being, in fact, quite unique. And I think that I was fortunate to be part of a certain kind of very unique time sequence of Baroda, with certain discourses that were occurring in the contemporary context of Indian art practice that allowed for people like me who were a student to swim in those very, very, amazing waters. They were not, they were not murky waters. They were waters that had this kind of crystal clarity, and I think that if I even bring into this, people like Vivan Sundaram, Geeta Kapoor, we had so many people who were connected to Baroda, not because they had to be, but because they found the scholarship and the ideation within the Faculty of Fine Arts at that time, something interesting to engage with, And so I think that, a teaching institution defines itself by the good and the bad.
Yeah.
But I think that we were fortunate to have at that time some of the best. And I think they pulled the breeches of the others up and obliged even those who may have been not as illustrious or not as scholarly to find the best that they could be. And so, I remember somebody who was in the printmaking department, somebody called Hasmukh Paisha, who would have been considered perhaps a very simple and ordinary teacher, but he gave to us a kind of comprehension of something as simple and basic as monochromatic design. And because he had somebody perhaps like KG Subramaniam in his, peripheral vision, he obliged himself to be, a commanding presence in his own little space. And so I think that we were very fortunate. I think the other thing that perhaps everybody does know about, but it cannot be overstated, is that there was, and I perhaps find this a little lacking today in a general sense in art education. In the time when I was studying, there was no separation between art history and the practice of art. And so, you rushed across to these dingy lecture rooms the moment you knew that some wonderful seminar was happening there, or Karl Khandalawala was going to be talking, or Jitendra Jain was visiting, or XYZ was coming, and you just Mildred Archer, you name it. And it was something that you did not because somebody insisted that you had to go to make up a number in an auditorium. In fact, the auditorium was so packed, and in those days people would smoke. There would be this haze of smoke, and people virtually sitting on top of each other with cups of tea spilling over. And all of this was because you understood how those whisperings, of others would come to be with you forever, to come back to you when you would be miles away from that particular time. And so I think that art history was taught and was lived and was presented to be something that actually was the plinth to an art practitioner.
You know, Rekha, oh, yeah, what I found really particularly interesting about that time was this idea of a curriculum centered around the concept of living traditions, or the idea that tradition is necessary to modern and contemporary art, which K.G. Subramaniam developed. So you had this exhibition of folk art and then the fine arts fair where, you know, the local artisans would teach students their trade, and this wonderful transfer of knowledge. So inviting students to learn from different media and forms. And you can see the influence with artists like Mrinalini Mukherjee. And
yes.
So how did that really enrich you as an artist, or the group of students as artists?
You know, I'm very grateful to have had somebody like Jyoti Bhatt in my life, because here again, I think it's important to recognize and see that there was a greater collective spirit within the interaction and the practice of artists in those days. Maybe perhaps because the art market hadn't pronounced itself, though I must say that one is not crucifying the art market in any way. It was just a different time. And so you didn't have anything other than your belief and your faith. Now, what was interesting to see is that many of our art practitioners of that time came from, you know, situations where they were closer to traditions of rural and folk and tribal practices sometimes. And so they brought these wonderful things either in the memory or in the reality of their associations. And then you had, you know, the wisdom of people like Subramaniam in conversations with people like, you know, Pupul Jaikar and other people like that, who understood that the divide in India had to be worked at, where, you know, the urban practices and those that were not within the urban, you know, focus had to find a way of communicating with one another, you know. And so I think the execution of things like the Baroda Faculty of Fine Arts Fun Fair was an exercise in that. It may have come from the other module of, you know, the Kala Mela that was in practice somewhere else, but it was also to bring in a sense of not just seeing the practice of, you know, tribal and folk art separate, but how do you bring it into something that also accommodates a modern understanding of your conversation with it. So these are things I think that we were bathed with. And you know, when you're young and you take many things in the stride within which you are just existing without over questioning it. And I think that in some ways that innocence may have been lost slightly today in this large and massive, wonderful world of internet, but it also creates a kind of isolation from curiosities that you tumble into. You know, so when you were presented with a Pat painter, or when you were presented with, you know, Mulela traditions of a sculptural practice, you just delved into it without, you know, wondering whether this was going to be of any use to you or not. You allowed yourself to have the humility to understand that maybe you didn't need to know the end result of why you need to commune with something. So I think that is one of the best things that I received as a student from that environment.
I know. You know, the idea of being fearless to experiment, not so worried about the outcome, but let's try. I think that really helps artists hone their practice, because you're trying a million different things.
Or even just exposed to it, you know, exposed to it without any pre-consideration that it has to be useful to you.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, the narrative school of painting, or the Baroda school, as it was popularly known, developing in the 70s and 80s, you were very much a part of that ecosystem. There was Giv Patel, there was Nalini Malani, Sweer Patwardhan, Bhupen Kakar. I remember you telling me that the narrative tradition, which was hugely impactful, but not necessarily something that you felt you had to imbibe in your practice. So I want you to talk about that.
As I said, when you're young, you kind of embrace things because that becomes your family in a way. So your teachers are the people who are creating the environment of your exposures. And so I think that given the fact that we had many people from that actual movement within our vicinity, we were always overhearing, so to speak, the kind of discourses that were fashioning a certain kind of content to a contemporary, narrative that was happening. Now, I think that in my particular individual journey, I'm somebody who I think through just the simple exercise of everyday working with a rigor, formulated a space of curiosities and formulated a space of language discoveries that allowed me to create the momentum of my own journey. And I think that, with the breakdown of my marriage that occurred, there was a certain insistence of myself to look at and to create a gender comprehension that was perhaps more emphatic than it may have been for somebody without those ongoing experiences. And so I think that that led me to find areas or territories that brought about content to my work. And therefore, I began to not necessarily need to look for a sense of belonging within what others may have been placing as exciting. But I found other binaries, other ways by which to negotiate the labyrinth of discoveries. Because I was, and I remain primarily a figurative artist. That to me has been because I see all lessons of life. I'm able to comprehend, the lessons of life from human experiences. And so that becomes the obvious container that finds its way into my articulation. And I think so there was where the link and the comparison and the empathy lay with the narrative, the Baroda narrative painters, all of whom were marvelous people and whom I learned so much from. But then I found that I needed to go within other areas of engagement that slowly led me to something that presented my articulation differently. And that, I think, came from my travel to place myself in London with another rigor of discourse. Okay. So I think that I've always said this, and I say this again and again, and people must be tired of hearing me say this, but I think that as you travel in any journey, you don't travel, without some luggage and some baggage. And so you always carry something with you. What you've learned, what you've imbibed, what you choose to reject, they all become little containers. And I think that I owe a lot to the exposures I received in my entire educational space of 8 years. What it did was it allowed me to sort of look at it like a piano where I could place my fingers, so to speak, on whatever note I wanted to, knowing that the note would resonate something for me. But then I had to take the note and do something with it to create something that would make meaning and resonance for me in a different way.
Thank you. So I'd like to stay with this thought and maybe expand it a little more. Because giving it a certain context, because there was a lot happening in the art world at this time. There were discourses on reconfiguring history, if you like, contemporary history, and how colonialism had impacted it. So the canons of high art were established during that time, which largely foregrounded Hindu and Buddhist art, and the effect that this had on the vernacular and the popular art, And then you had the exhibition Place for People, the path-breaking essay written by Geeta Kapoor. So in the midst of all this, and you have spoken about it a bit, I wanted to expand on that idea. Even when you would here, you would gone abroad and you came back, how did Rekha the artist look at negotiating this world, arriving at an understanding of where to place yourself and the work that you do?
You know, it was an interesting, it was an exciting, interesting, and equally confusing space sometimes. And I say this because, you know, when you talk about the way certain issues were of importance, so let us take something like the vernacular, which was, you know, something that I grew up within. It also had some shortcomings to it, because in the ideas of trying to, and very necessarily, you know, demarcating and reconfiguring history, which we had to do, we also sometimes forgot the gray areas. And why I say this is that there were certain instances where I almost felt obliged that I had to defend my mongrel status, you know, coming from a kind of cross-cultural family. Father Parsi, mother South Indian, father in a boarding school from the age of 4, English as a mother tongue, traveling all over the world, no actual place of location to identify oneself with. I actually had people ask me, you know, do you really know what India is? And I had never stepped out of India in my entire life, and I'm not Anglo-Indian, not that there's any problem in being Anglo-Indian. And it brought a certain interesting question mark. It didn't make me defensive at all. I'm never too bothered if a cap doesn't fit me. But it brought some interesting questions to me that, you know, sometimes we are not interested in the oral histories of people. We are very interested in creating categories for us to understand where we belong. And I think that what for me became of huge importance during that very fecund time of discourse related to what you were talking about. At a personal level, it brought for me an insistence to hold empathy for that which often goes unconsidered, that which cannot be labeled, that which cannot be categorized. And you find this often in the best of instances when people are having the best of intentions, but they're so they're so insistent on being able to tidy everything up. So now, coming away from a colonial history, which of course we all have, there's, you know, you're born in independent India, so therefore you're not part of that, you know, passage that you know, you've been gifted a certain liberty. But there are certain things that remain as residual histories that can become uncomfortable for those who don't perceive it within the context of the other. And I think we are seeing that today in India more pronouncedly, where we have an intolerance for anything that doesn't comfortably fit into something that we define as India. And so I think I became aware of this, the subtlety of how do you define something as massive as identity, which is in a way today a passé word, but in those days, or what is something that is, you know, your space of belonging, you not necessarily just as the individual, but within whatever minority you may belong to. Now, I think that the world of art for me has always been this space that opens up these discourses. I would really want to say to people that, you know, who are less familiar and who are wanting to learn, so I'm not saying this in any mocking way, that when they come into exhibitions, you know, they look to see a picture or an object and they want it to see it with some kind of, you know, conclusiveness. I think in many instances, the world of art production, if for want of a better word, comes from a continuing process of negotiating the world as you see it, perceived reality. Because, you know, reality is really perception. It's not what is truth and what is reality. And so I think that I don't know if I've answered your question at all, but
no, you do.
There was this very exciting time that I cannot imagine contemporary art history being without. But within that, there were also certain things that I think up till now we haven't really examined, which is interesting to see as well, that anything that is looked at needs to also have something else that falls outside of it. And I think that there were many oral histories, many areas of things that didn't fit into where this vernacular was, or where, did you have to know an Indian language to be Indian? So these are interesting things. Does it make you more able to comprehend, classical histories of your country if you don't know Sanskrit? So these became little interesting passages. But what I would say is that it opened up many exciting venues to find furthermore areas to critique and to question and to investigate. And I think that my generation, perhaps, if you look at the radical group, there have been many people that came into that, which brought about new and exciting questions to an ongoing, very exciting debate of that time.
Yeah. Rekha, to respond to that, I've always been mystified when someone says, you don't understand the real India. I mean, there are a myriad Indias and a myriad identities. And we all are bits and pieces of all these things that we pick up as we go. So I really don't know what the real India is. But so let's come to a different aspect. I'm coming closer to you, the person, as well as the artist, and how it has reflected in your work. Because you always defined yourself as a feminist, a mantle that many women artists are uncomfortable with. I'd like you to talk about this and how it informs you as a person and an artist.
Oh, I think I was just born with the feminist DNA. I can't imagine any logical individual, man or woman, not encompassing a gender comprehension of what equality should be. I think that my choice to live in India, because I had choices to live outside of India, was simply because I think that there is a territory that needs to be addressed. And I think that everyone cannot be an activist. This is something that people need to recognize and understand, but we can be interventionalists, and that's a very different thing. And that any person can be in the smallest capacity, in the, you can be completely unknown to others, and you can still be an interventionalist in wherever you are, in whatever you do. And I think that is the small space of territory I hold, and I've held for many, many years. That I don't look only for the other to be able to create or recognize where change or attention is required. I think that as an individual, I would like to place myself. Now, it sounds like a very grandiose thing to say, but that you choose your battles to fight. I was just saying that to my son the other day. You choose your battles to fight. And for me, education, health issues, domestic violence, economic sustenance. These are some of the few things that you really want to see as being available to people who are vulnerable. And in my opinion, though you can take poverty and say that it goes way beyond just the woman, I choose to look at the woman and the issues of women and where I can apply what my interventionalist space can be. So my scope of assistance does not have to come in the form of me being an art practitioner. When it comes to my art, it's the lens through which I look at the world. It's the lens through which I don't know. I don't have any other vision through which to perceive the world. And feminism is not about male bashing. For those, I'm sure the audience we have today are very sophisticated people and certainly understand that. My concern is that we look at, we look at our country and we understand that the woman still remains a second-class citizen in our own country for a variety of reasons. And this is not to make it some political debate. It's the way we start, the manner in which we bring up our girl children. Whatever scope of economy that individual may stand from, you often see these terrible situations where one sense of expectation is there for one gender and another sense of expectation is there for another gender. And so I think that, I will not see these changes in my lifetime. That's unfortunate, but we have walked a long way. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud that there are so many empowered spaces, so many collectives that work towards seeing that issues related to women are addressed. In my work, I have always said that, it's like looking at a bookshelf and knowing that certain authors write within certain oeuvres or certain genres. And so my world is that of my negotiation as a woman with a vision that can only look at things that hold empathy for the woman and that are looking to see how we comprehend our histories within that.
There's a painting in the map collection, which really I find very moving. There's this little girl standing with her hands folding treasured possessions to herself. And the painting is called The Graveyard of My Childhood. So what are you really talking about? And as an adult, are there certain dreams that you feel you have lost? And the use, and I want you to talk a little bit about the color red, because it keeps reappearing in every painting.
Now it's pink. You're excited. No, on a serious note, I think that, my placement of myself within my work is that because I'm a woman. It's not actually Rekha Rodwittiya, but I hold the physiognomy of being a woman. I hold the territory of being a woman. And so therefore I exist within the representations in some ways that are oblique references, not to me, but to, they're references not oblique, they're references to the woman at large. In that particular painting, for those who don't know, it's a large painting of a girl with a basket, kind of tawri in a way, full of objects. And I think that, it's really talking about, the loss of innocence when you have the girl child or children or women, look at the way rape is used as a tool of oppression, higher caste to lower caste. Look at the manner in which we have employment for women in urban cities as domestic staff, and how do we treat them? So it's a broad spectrum of looking at how, most children, unless you have completely dysfunctional parents, are born within some space of, delight and joy, or, however poor or whatever the circumstance is. And then from circumstance alone, things change into this beautiful little being coming into a world that starts demanding things and removing things and objectifying and creating a space where there is less that nurtures and more that oppresses. And oppression can come in many shapes and forms, as we well know, Kamini. I am such a privileged woman. I mean, please, I am so privileged. And yet I'm not absent of the same kind of oppression that meets me outside of my doorstep, that comes in different shapes and forms. And if I, who am so, privileged, I'm facing those things, think of those who don't have the the many basics and beyond basics that I have. And so I think that it causes a great sense of unease for me. I'm not going to say the word sadness, because then that becomes, but it creates a great sense of unease in me that down the road of so many years of independence of our country, we haven't been able to, formulate a better kind of national plan that brings about, a sense of safety and, empowerment to women in a correct way. And we have to address this and we have to acknowledge it. As an artist, my work doesn't tell specific stories. It creates territories that hopefully provoke. I'm currently doing a series of work called Home is Wherever You Are. And so, it's an open-ended, kind of connotation within which there's a kaleidoscopic myriad of imagery that obliges you to find, ways to decode from allegorical references or poetic, sort of suggestions. Are we storytellers of the world? Yes, we are, but we don't have singular narratives. We have narratives that are actually shared by thousands of people. And it's just that we become the sutradhars, no? To creating order from these many thousands of stories that have existed even before my birth. Because what is interesting to see, and I will quickly address this and we can go to another point, is that if you look at the area of violence that prevails in the world today, we have had, for those of us who have had the fortune of travel, we have been to, monuments and institutions that have memorialized certain horrific events in history, with the idea that it sensitizes us not to ever repeat them again. So if you visit Auschwitz or Dachau or, the Pol Pot, memorial, or in Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, you are just left, without breath in you at the enormity and scale of human degradation. And yet we repeat it day after day after day in all societies all over the world. And this brings me to question, what are these premises of humanity that we propose that we should, in fact, as individuals have? Now, what is interesting for me is that I think art becomes this receptacle which allows people the space of contemplation. If you go to a museum, if you see an exhibition, if you pick up a work of an author, if you attend a music performance, these are these spaces of contemplation, reflection, that come to the viewer, that come to the audience, that come to the multitude of people in another way. Because sometimes I think that the instruction of the obvious has fallen sometimes on deaf ears, because we have heard it so many times, we have seen it so many times, that we don't realize we're not evil people, but we've just become desensitized. And I think this is where the role of art comes in. So why do I paint? I don't paint because I think I can change the world. I paint just simply because, one, it's my way of negotiating the world. And two, it's my way of inviting somebody else to come in with their experiential self, with their contemplation, with their comprehension of history, their confusion. And to come in and to find perhaps some thread. Because what we fail to actually insist upon, and this I would say of our educational institutions going back to schools, is we don't ask ourselves, what are the shared experiences that make for us to actually understand collective histories? We just want to try to make individual, unique people. And in trying to do this, we forget that we are we're in the imprint of already many genealogies of history.
Communities, yeah.
We're not unique beings, you know. And so we spend all our time trying to make artificial intelligence and yay and bo, and we will, you know, we will then video somebody who's being run over or stabbed or raped. You know, like where do you draw in your humanness? And I think perhaps museums are such places, you know, art and things related to creative processes.
I'm glad we got that point in, because we're all emerging from a really difficult time. And hopefully Omicron won't set us back too badly, but it's been a really difficult time even for the art community, especially for traditional communities of artisans, performing artists. And even WeMap had started this grant relief fund for artists because everyone's struggling. So some museums have reimagined their collections and their spaces as spaces of healing. So when questions are being raised about the relevance of museums, I like the way you brought in art as, as these spaces of contemplation and reflection. And can we look at art really now as a source of mental well-being? Because we're looking at the complete isolation and depression that people are feeling after the effects of this pandemic. So where do you think we can use art to play that role?
You know, I would start off by saying I hope our children can go back to schools. You know? I think that, you know, I won't necessarily say that the pandemic per se is going to be something that provides us, you know, with a greater space of offering solace through art. Mm-hmm. What I will say is that what the pandemic has done is it has brought people to recognize the necessity of being engaged with the other. The isolation, the fear, it has slightly put a brake on this idea of I, me, myself, mm-hmm. and brought about this understanding that there is something that is called we, you know, mm-hmm. And so it takes me back again to, you know, we recently in Baroda, we have this wonderful gallery called Gallery White, and there was this exhibition that was a couple of days ago. And it was so wonderful to see this masked community, you know, bursting at the walls and holding all the protocol and seeing that you had your space. And I have been to so many exhibitions, you know, before the pandemic, where some student will not bother to come, some person is too busy, able, and it warmed my heart, because it reminded me that we have understood that we don't have to always get something tangible from taking our time to be in something, to be with something, to be with someone. Yeah. And I think the pandemic has brought about that humility, that mental health wellness is not something that is a designated space that is to do with the mentally incapable or those who are with illness. It is the you and the me that need mental health wellness. And when you can go into spaces that are places which are inviting collective interaction and giving you something that may not necessarily be a takeaway, that I can buy this, I can take that beautiful icon that is behind you, much as I would like to, you know, but just to be able to say, I can come here. And on the off chance, I can find that my soul and my spirit has an ability to wander outside of myself for a little while, and to gather something and to take it back, which is not a consumable thing. It is something that is completely to do with the subtle and nuanced space of experiencing life. So I think that we are focused much more on that now.
The Rekha I know is a person who believes she has to make a difference to this world. Let's not waste time. So Collective Studio is your way of giving and caring. I want you to talk a little about it and what you are trying to achieve through it.
Nothing. No, I think that, I have been gifted the generosity of belief. I have had, we have somebody like my friend Firoza. I mean, Firoza has loved me and believed in me when I was a 24, 25, 26-year-old, Mr. Al-Qazi, just these wonderful friendships of belief that allowed me to stand tall. And I took from that, especially from my teachers like Nasreen, Peter de Francia, and, later in later years, people like I've mentioned, who didn't have to care for you, but chose to. And they did so without any kind of great agendas attached to it. This was a huge learning lesson for me, as well as something that I also imbibed from my parents, my father. My father was somebody who always had his ear to the stories of those who didn't have the courage to actually, voice them. And he was very beloved as a pilot and with his, officers and those who were below the ranks. So I think this culmination of many things taught me to understand that there is something that you need to do which may not be something you want to do. Mm-hmm. If you do everything you want to do, then it comes from a certain kind of selfish premise. So, as an artist, I love the isolation of, my space and my time and whatever. But I did recognize and realize that there were many young, students who needed to be heard. Now, in no way am I trying to put down the art institutions that exist, but sometimes in the prescribed curriculum, there isn't often the space to accommodate or the time to accommodate that. And also there is an absence of the feminine imprint within a lot of educational spaces. So I think that I just found that there were many people who came to me with this enthusiasm, with their anxieties, with their anguish, with their with their desires, and you can't close your door. And so the Collective Studio Baroda has evolved from me taking care of somebody who had tuberculosis, to somebody who needed gynecological care, to somebody who needed to study for something, or somebody who was, whose parents were not caring for them. And art was the big bundle into which it all was tied up. So, so my partner Surendran always says that he fears when I listen to anyone's story because he doesn't know whom he'll come back to seeing in the home. It is the way it is. And we have chosen not to institutionalize it. We don't have it as a registered organization. And I've said this very often, not to put a halo over my head. But, another thing I feel is that you need to give when you don't necessarily have. So if there's something about, what is the right age? There's no right age, So this started when I was 27 years old. Whether it was some person who needed to come home and have a bath, who needed, to have a meal, and who needed to, show their work. It doesn't matter, it's a little bit of hot water that goes, a little bit of your time that goes. It's okay, It's simple things. And, it creates many, 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 many links, because art is not about teaching somebody how to paint. I can't do that. I can only teach you to know yourself. I can't even teach you that. I can beckon you to finding yourself. I can hope that the rigors of my belief in you, a couple of your tears perhaps, will wake you up. And you will find yourself, and you will find that little wrap, like we take our clothes for istring. They're all clean. We put it in this bundle and we tie it, and without that, it'll all get dirty again. So we need our little bundles, and then we find ourselves. We sort of iron ourselves out, and we come back. So That's what the Collective Studio Baroda is.
And really, that's sometimes what you most need.
Yeah. We've provided, I've said this many times, we've provided many, we have residencies, we've had teaching programs, we've had funding, we've had seminars, we've had curatorial spaces. Yeah, many people do that. Collective Studio Baroda has a little bit more tentacles that go out, which is about faith, belief, love, and no expectancy in return. We don't want money, we don't want your art, we don't want to be recognized. Faith produces many wonderful things.
Of course. Okay, so since we're talking about that, I think one last question, Rekha, about the role of an artist in the world at large. How do you see your relationship with the community, with the art ecosystem, other institutions, art schools, art spaces, museums? Some museums place artists at the heart of the institution. They are the driving force behind the institution and what it does. There are other institutions where the collection drives everything that it does. What is the role and where do you see the artist in relation to the community and the other institutions?
It's a bit like a horse and a cart. You can't have one without the other. I firmly believe that, I would go so far as to say that no society, no nation would be a healthy one without the kind of contribution and the existence of creative people. We look like perhaps people would imagine that, medicine is important and doctors, of course they are. But you're a soulless society if you don't have your music, if you don't have your popular culture, if you don't have your history, you don't have your art, your sculpture, your monuments, your architecture. Within the process of any ongoing history, you will always have dissidents, you will always have resistance, you will always have provocation. I think a healthy society needs to allow for all of that. Why am I saying this? Is that when you talk about the role of an individual within this larger space of belonging is not often a comfortable space. It can be a prickly space. If you didn't have people who questioned and you didn't have people who protested, you would have a very boring kind of an existence. And art and all creative spaces have always been the conscience keepers to a society. I think that, we are the kind of monitors of a classroom sometimes in a way. We take on certain unseen battles. We take on certain issues larger than what our own pronouncement within them may be. And this is something that is very essential. So therefore, I say this because if you look at any museum, if you look at art that has existed and the time of the individual no longer is there, you will actually see the points of resistance and protest within that. And it isn't, whether it is, you take somebody like Ram Kinkar Bej, you have that, you look at the other Bengali artist who has done The Wounds. This is appalling that we're forgetting the name. Anyway, so we have many people who have, Somnath Hor. You have many people who have very quietly placed their concerns, their articulation. You have somebody like Ghulam Mohammed Sheikh, who has done, City for Sale. You have Suthir Patwardhan, who will, many people. You have some wonderful artists like Reena Kalat, who creates poetic imagery, but with something that has huge question marks. Shilpa Gupta. The list is long. And many occasions, these productions can appear to be controversial, can appear to be, problematic. But what is so essential is it actually creates discourse and dialogue. It creates a space where you are obliged to pause. And, when you pause, you kind of, rinse your cup a little bit. You've had your 10th cup of tea and you realize, you're making it the same. You need to pause and rinse it. So this is how I look at the space of belonging of an individual, of an art practitioner, and their space of associations with how they perceive their sense of belonging within a museum. If you're talking about something that is much more, connected to the activity of, engagement, then yes, we have these wonderful things of collaborations. But the larger role of the artist belonging within history, within these institutions, really comes from the conscience keeping of how we create for those pauses and moments of reflection, where just recently, Rubina Karode was down for a wonderful little lecture she gave at the Faculty of Fine Arts a couple of days ago, in which she, now somebody like Arpita Singh, she spoke about Arpita Singh and Nalini Milani, two wonderful, artists who have been conscience keepers in so many ways. If I talk about, because maybe Nalini's work is not so known to many people, unfortunately, not because she's not well known, but maybe because they've not had access. But if you take somebody like Arpita Singh, she makes these just amazing works that look so beautiful at one instance. And the more you see it, the more you understand the layered insistence of what she's trying to underline and hold you accountable for. And yet, if you have a conversation with her, as many would say, she'll say, it's okay. So these are these wonderful, situations of how art finds its ways, carrying the individual, because when one talks about one's belonging within these spaces, it can also be from this generational space of empathy, where you see that collections are put together from the histories that need to be made now. What is wonderful about a space like MAP is that it's creating, not just from the past, but, there are many conversations that you and I have had about how do legacies stay? How do you find the negotiation where you find that new legacies bring about new histories related to either gender or related either to the artist and the individual who is going to where the art or their existence, where their existence stops, but their art continues something, often not just necessarily in the making of their own art practice, but maybe in their writing or maybe in some object that they had. So it's an interesting concept of how we take ourselves to belong within these spaces.
I always think of the artist as this person who comes in when we are all comfortably slopped in our armchairs. There's this insistent finger that comes and pokes you in the back. Maybe a beautiful finger, it may be a brutal finger. It may be but it's that insistent that forces you out of that comfort zone and makes you look afresh at things. So, but Rekha, I don't think we can end this discussion without you telling us, or just without me mentioning the fact that you're an artist in another space, which is the kitchen. You're a dream cook, and the pandemic was a time when food was such a source of comfort. What would be that meal that you cook for the people you love? Tell us about food and what it means to you.
I think food, the dining table. The dining table has been where I grew up. I grew up around a dining table that always was a space for sharing conversations, to be heard, to be, at the age of 5, 6, 7, you felt so important because X was listening to you, my father would listen to you, my mother would listen to me, wonderful. And I think that food for me has always been, I think it started with creating memories for Mithun. When you have this little child who's, gangly and tall and, growing up and, and anything you make becomes this delight. I remember making this god-awful cake. I mean, the worst cake you could ever think of. It was hard as rock. And he took a piece of it and he so proudly said, "Best cake, mama." So I think that, it's these silly stories that take you to want to, so I think that food is about memories, food is about love, food is about nurturing. And it doesn't have to be anything that is grand. I have made fried bread and anda with an onion, and my friends would sit around with a cup of chai and we'd have this wonderful evening, and it's not what you spend, it's what you exude through the deliverance of that. So yes, I love to cook. So Surendran always complains that he became 10 kg overweight after meeting me. Rubbish. It's, I say, lack of discipline.
I believe him. But Rekha, it's really been a pleasure talking to you, because as they say, you always bat on the front foot. There's no, just prodding at the ball. There's no deflecting. There's no letting it go past. You always take it right on the bat. So it's really been great talking to you. Thank you for taking the time.